Welcome to the St. Croix Valley Athletic Association's Flag Football Rough Play Training. Flag football is a non-contact sport and our organization has a zero tolerance policy for rough play. In this presentation, we will be reviewing what qualifies as rough play and how to call penalties consistently. Any questions you have can be referred to the Flag Football Commissioner for clarification. Today's agenda will focus on unnecessary roughness and how to distinguish between less severe contact penalties. We will also examine how to spot unsportsmanlike conduct and how that differs from taunting. Finally, we will also review the mandatory reporting requirements for these type of violations. Let's start with unnecessary roughness. Unnecessary roughness is any avoidable, excessive, or dangerous contact that violates the non-contact nature of flag football. Any referee or official can throw this flag, and every unnecessary roughness penalty must be reported to me for further review. That is a league requirement. So what exactly does count as unnecessary roughness? If a player exhibits excessive or avoidable contact, such as lowering the shoulder into an opponent, pushing, shoving, or knocking a player down, or running through a defender who is in established position, these actions should warrant an unnecessary roughness penalty. Dangerous or overly aggressive play should also warrant an unnecessary roughness penalty. These actions can include diving into a player leaving their feet to initiate contact with another player, whether to pull a flag or advance the football, tackling or wrapping arms around the ball carrier, grabbing and holding clothing resulting in pulling the ball carrier to the ground, or any contact above the shoulders. Any contact after the play should be penalized as unnecessary roughness. If you witness hitting or pushing after the whistle, late contact on a quarterback after the ball is thrown, or shoving a receiver after an incomplete pass, throw the penalty flag. Also, be aware of players that are playing the player instead of the flag. This includes body blocking the ball carrier, or using body parts, arms, elbows, hips, etc., to impede movement. For example, a defensive player checking an offensive player at the snap to disrupt the timing of the receiver's route, or an offensive player running into a defensive rusher who is in their predefined rush path. Even if a player didn't mean it, unnecessary roughness contact is still a foul and should be penalized. Now that we've defined what constitutes unnecessary roughness, let's review the mechanics for calling the penalty. Step 1 is to identify the situation. Asking yourself a series of questions can help promote consistency in your penalty calling. First, was the contact avoidable? This is not to be confused with intentional. Avoidable means, in your judgment, the player could have avoided contact either by adjusting their style of play, for example, an overly aggressive player, or moving slightly to avoid contact, even if that means they missed the play. Both teams have a right to occupy spaces on the field, and both have a responsibility to avoid contact. Second, did the player's actions create a risk? Was the rusher running so fast that they were unable to slow down in time to avoid contact with the quarterback? Or did the ball carrier attempt to advance the ball by running through a defensive player? Step 2 is to judge the severity of the contact. Was the contact incidental? Were both players unaware of the other and bumped into each other? This should either result in no foul or offsetting penalties, depending on the implications of the play. Was the contact careless? If so, you can use the illegal contact penalties. The distinction for careless contact will be discussed in future slides. Was the contact forceful or dangerous? Hard or intentional hits result in unnecessary roughness. Step 3 is to throw the penalty flag immediately when you witness contact. A quick referee conference after the play can be used to assess the situation and severity and determine which penalties to call or whether to rule the contact is incidental. Referees and officials be watching for. Pre-snap, watch for the following. Players lining up close to each other on the line of scrimmage. The offense has a right to a free release from the line of scrimmage, and a defensive player lined up closely could easily interfere with that. Keep an eye on players with an aggressive stance or behavior. Read the emotions of the players and pay special attention to those displaying aggressive behavior. If a player consistently initiates contact during a game, note that player's position and give them extra attention during the play. Post-snap, watch for the following. Defenders that run through the ball carrier instead of just pulling flags. Offensive players that lower shoulders to advance the ball. And again, pay special attention to the flagpole. A lot of contact happens at this point. And of course, watch for frustrated players or escalating behavior. This can often result in aggressive play and contact. End of play, watch for the following. Late contact, like pushing or shoving after the whistle. This often is a result of a frustrated player. Players falling on top of each other, whether intentional or poor mechanics. The behavior should be corrected. Also watch for contact during celebrations and turnovers. Let's review some of the common contact penalties and how to distinguish between contact penalties and unnecessary roughness. We'll start with pass interference, both offense and defensive. First thing in defining pass interference is to determine who has the primary right to the thrown ball. First, for a player to be considered to having the primary right, the player must have a reasonable ability to catch the ball. The ball cannot be beyond the normal reach of the player. Penalties can still occur even if the ball was uncatchable. We just don't classify a player as having a primary right if the ball was out of their reach. Then the priority goes to the player with an established stationary position and waiting for a throw and pass. This player could be on offense or on defense if it was an errant throw. If both players are in motion while the ball is in the air and only one player is looking toward the player looking toward the passer has the primary right to the ball. If both players are in motion and looking towards the thrown pass, neither can be classified as having the primary right to the ball. In this situation, if contact occurs, it could be ruled as pass interference if one player clearly pushes or shoves the other to get to the ball, incidental contact resulting in no penalty, or offsetting penalties depending on the severity of the contact and the impact to the play. View the distinction between pass interference and unnecessary roughness. You should call a pass interference penalty if there is minor physical interference with an opponent attempting to catch a thrown ball. Examples could include contact while reaching over the back to block a pass, hitting or holding the arm of a receiver, or putting hands in front of the face of a receiver to block their view of the ball. Unnecessary roughness should be called if major physical interference occurs during an attempted catch. This could include pushing or tackling the player attempting to make the catch, uncontrolled or aggressive contact while attempting to block or catch the ball by a non-primary player, or repeated pass interference penalties or warnings. The passer of the football is put in a vulnerable position during the throwing motion, and therefore we enforce the roughing the passer penalty to protect them from any contact during the throwing motion. Roughing the passer should be called if any minor physical contact is made by a defensive player during the throwing motion. This can include incidental contact to the passer's throwing arm during the pass, if there was a clear attempt to avoid the contact. Note that any contact must result in a penalty. There is no incidental contact during the throwing motion. Unnecessary roughness should be called for any major contact to the passer immediately before, during, or after the throw. This would include any aggressive hit to the passer's arm, head, or body while the defensive player is attempting to block a pass, pushing or tackling the passer, uncontrolled or aggressive rushing resulting in contact, or repeated roughing the passer penalties or warnings. Defensive holding results from a defensive player physically restricting the offensive player's movements. Examples of defensive holding include not allowing a free release from the line of scrimmage, resulting from minor incidental contact that throws off the offensive player's movement. It could also include a brief hold of the ball carrier's body or clothing instead of pulling the flag. Unnecessary roughness should be called for any major contact by a defensive player that inhibits the offensive player's movement. This includes pushing or tackling a player, uncontrolled or aggressive defensive defense resulting in contact, or repeated holding penalties or warnings. Charging is an offensive penalty where the ball carrier attempts to advance the ball by initiating contact with a defensive player with an established position on the field. Charging should be called if the ball carrier lowers the head or shoulders to initiate contact or leaves their feet by diving or lunging to advance the football that results in contact with a defensive player. A ball carrier that runs or dives directly into a defensive player, exhibits uncontrolled or aggressive running resulting in contact, or has repeated charging penalties or warnings should be given an unnecessary roughness penalty. Participants, coaches, trainers, staff, officials, and spectators are expected to behave in a manner that positively reflects the values espoused by all sports played within the SCVAA. Coaches are responsible for the conduct of their players, any assistant coaches, and the spectators on their sidelines. Parents are expected to behave in an acceptable and positive manner at all times. Unsportsmanlike conduct during games, matches, or practices will not be tolerated. All unsportsmanlike conduct penalties must be reported to the Flag Football Commissioner for review and further disciplinary action. CBAA has a zero tolerance policy regarding unacceptable conduct. This includes verbally or physically abusing players, coaches, or officials, addressing an official in a disrespectful manner, influencing the decision or arguing the judgment call of an official, any physical aggression, the use of drugs, alcohol, or tobacco, using profanity or making insulting, vulgar gestures, or tantrum-like acts like throwing chairs or other equipment, damaging or destroying property. Taunting is an attempt to provoke someone in an insulting or contemptuous manner. Examples of taunting include excessive celebrations, especially if directed at an opponent's performance, or any comments intended to solicit a negative reaction from an opponent. Unsportsmanlike conduct penalties should be called when a player, coach, or spectator exhibits offensive or confrontational language. This can include a defensive player mimicking the offensive team's signals during a snap to confuse the offense, the use of profanity, or arguing or fighting. As a reminder, all unnecessary roughness and unsportsmanlike conduct penalties must be reported to the Flag Football Commissioner for review and further disciplinary action. Take personal notes immediately, at halftime, or after the game to preserve as many details as possible. The league will follow up with all reports and determine if additional disciplinary action is required. We will also maintain a log of incidents to monitor for trends. That brings us to the end of our flag football rough play training. Thank you for your attention and for the commitment you bring to our league. If you have any questions, need clarification on anything we covered today, or want additional guidance as the season gets underway, please reach out. The best way to contact us is by email at flagfootball@scvaa.org. We're here to support you, and we appreciate everything you do to make SCVAA flag football a great experience for our players, coaches, and fans.